I'm Pedro da Costa. This is Peterson Perspectives. I'm joined today by Monica de Bolle to speak about Brazil's seemingly endless political mess. And I have to say, the casual observer of Brazilian politics could be forgiven for when they hear talk of impeachment for thinking we're still talking about Dilma Rousseff, the recently impeached president. But now the impeachment talk refers to the vice president who took over for her. Can you tell us a little bit about what's been happening in the last couple of months while everybody's been focused on the United States?
Well, the mess has continued. As I think we spoke on previous occasions here, the impeachment of Rousseff was not going to make the political crisis go away, and it did make it die down for a little while, but it was a very short period, and now it's back, as was expected by some, not others. And there is this impeachment talk about Vice President Temer, who has taken over and who's now the president of the country, because of a few things that came out over the last few days. There's one thing that hasn't come out yet, which is the plea bargain agreement by Odebrecht, the construction company that was at the heart of the corruption scandal out of Petrobras. But apparently some members of his government have been cited in that. Maybe he has been cited in that. Nobody quite knows.
There already have been several ministers who have been forced to quit.
But there have been several ministers that have been forced to resign. So he's been in power for 6 months, and he has now lost 6 ministers. So this is a rate of 1 minister per month. The latest to go was actually his chief political articulator, his main intermediary with Congress, and he fell because of basically corrupt dealings. It has nothing to do with Petrobras. It has to do with other things that were going on. But
have they been able to fill these posts, or are these like now empty cabinets?
Some of them have been filled, others have not. This post in particular is a post that's very much within the inner circle of President Temer. So he has already said that he's going to be taking on that role himself, and he's going to be splitting with his chief of staff. So another member of his inner circle, until he can find somebody who is squeaky clean and can thus fill the role, which in Brazil these days is kind of hard to find.
Yeah, well, so getting to what we're all about here at the Peterson Institute, so the economic implications of this political mess. So you sort of rightly predicted a few months back that we wouldn't just bounce back because of the lifting of uncertainty that came from Dilma's impeachment, which led to a steep market rally. So where do you think this leaves the economy? Can you talk about the trouble spots and the issues with the states in particular?
Well, there are many trouble spots. I mean, we had conversations here before about the situation of Brazilian states. So Brazilian states are now in a very, very difficult situation. Several states are de facto bankrupt. Brazil doesn't really have a bankruptcy law for states, so basically what it means is that these states would need some kind of government bailout, but the government is not in a position to provide bailout at this point because the fiscal situation, there's a fiscal crunch in the country all around. So that's one problem. The other problem is, the sheer depth of the political crisis, the corruption scandal, and how that takes a toll on the economy, which some months ago I had predicted, look, this isn't going to get any better. And the prospects for a swift recovery, that people had been envisaging, say, only 3-4 months ago, are really not sound. It's not based on any kind of fundamental view of what's actually going on the ground. And this is what we're seeing materialize now. Today, Brazil just released its third quarter GDP figures, and actually the recession has steepened in the third quarter. It looks deeper in the third quarter relative to the second quarter, even relative to the first quarter of 2016.
So it's moving in the wrong direction.
So it's moving in the wrong direction. There are no clear signs that, things are going to get any better in the fourth quarter. In fact, the indicators seem to be pointing still in the direction of, a recession very much in place. That means that the scenario for growth in 2017, at least what people have been thinking, maybe Brazil will grow 1%, 1.5%, even 2%, which were numbers that were being thrown out there by both market analysts as well as by government officials. These things are pretty much out of the cards now. So it's looking very much as if Brazil will likely have very little growth, if any, And if that's the case, then the whole scenario for meeting fiscal targets, even though the fiscal target for next year is a deficit and so on, these are now very much in question.
And I assume that the reform momentum that was I guess the expectation of growth came from a potential momentum from reforms, right? So I assume that as the political fallout worsens, that the prospect for such reforms and therefore the growth that would come from them gets depleted.
Yeah,
Is that right?
Absolutely. And there were basically two, I mean, the government was focusing its reform effort on two fronts. So on the one hand, it was focusing on passing a spending cap, a limit on expenditures, which needs a constitutional amendment. This has already moved forward relatively well. It's received the support from the lower house that it needed. It appears to be receiving the support from the Senate that it needs. So it will probably come into place by, say, the end of this year. But that effort needs something which is complementary to it, and it's a very important reform as well, Social Security. And that one is highly unpopular and hasn't yet gone through, the kind of voting and procedures that these things have to go through in the Brazilian Congress. So most likely, the Social Security reform, without which the spending cap really has no bite, will probably only come to the floor, say sometime early next year. But at that point, given that the situation really isn't improving, the economic situation, given that the state of subnational finance is so bad that in certain states public services are being halted, so people are not having access to health, to education, security is falling apart. In Rio, the crime rates have spiked in recent months because of this. So people are feeling that very, very much in their daily lives. And this could very much spark a very, very, sort of deep backlash against any other reform effort that the government attempts to push through Congress.
So I guess the heavy political mood that we're seeing in the United States and in Europe, that we're not alone up here, and that it's actually kind of a global phenomenon.
It is a global phenomenon, and I think in Brazil is kind of a test case for everyone in a certain sense, because since in Brazil a lot of these so-called populist policies were put in place over the last 6 years, and for a while they actually worked, but now the country is in this situation that we see, of course compounded by corruption and all of these other things that have happened, are really telling for, are really sort of alarm bells, or at least, signals to what shouldn't be done and what shouldn't really be pursued.
Monica de Bolle, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.